Hello, and welcome to part 2 of Project 2029, a Reimagining. I'm Molly Jong-Fast, a columnist, podcaster, and person you occasionally see on cable news. In this episode, we're going to discuss regulation and antitrust. This is a subject that many people in the Democratic Party are scared of, despite it polling really well with the base and also independents. Let's get you up to speed. You may have noticed that the Heritage Foundation's wildly ambitious Project 2025 has been implemented at lightning speed, with nearly half of its goals reached in just 9 months. The agenda Heritage set forth has moved at breakneck speeds to reshape America into a right-wing policy testing lab that is failing its citizens. In this series, we are imagining not only what Democrats can do when they regain power, but what they must do. The popular reforms that change citizens' lives and get them to believe in the power and good of government. We've assembled some of the best minds to talk about how regulation and antitrust can be given a good name and can make the American people believe in it again. Let's start with the brilliant former chair of the Federal Trade Commission from 2021 to 2025, Lina Kahn.
Yeah, so before I was an academic, I actually got my start in all of this as a business researcher and reporter, and I spent a lot of time just understanding how various markets worked. And through that work, found that for decades now, we've seen markets become more and more consolidated, more and more concentrated. So, where decades ago you had dozens of competitors, you now just have a handful of companies that can control a market. And that's true in areas ranging from food and agriculture to you even go to the grocery store, you go down the snack aisle, you see hundreds of brands. Even there, you actually just have, 3 or 4 companies controlling the vast majority of the brands there. So it's really, we see this illusion of choice that is really actually masking extreme concentration of economic power. Through my work, I was really struck by how this private power can hurt people. One of the stories I did was about chicken farming, and chicken farmers, because of extreme consolidation, are oftentimes now dependent on a single chicken processor for their entire livelihood. And they would say that because that company has all that power, they can bully me, they can push me around, they can threaten to cut me off and, kill my livelihood. And that means I'm scared, and that means I'm too scared to even come and talk to the government. And it was just this real vivid illustration of how we think about oftentimes how if what you want is real freedom for people, you need to protect them from overreach by the state, by the government. But I think we also need to protect people from overreach by monopolies and by private companies that have so much power that they can really infringe on people's core freedoms and their material well-being. Basically, we want an economy where people get a fair shot. And what that means practically is, if you're a business person or a worker, you should be able to make a fair living, earn a fair wage, and not be worried that a big company is going to be able to cut you off or muscle you out. If you're a consumer, you should be able to get a fair shake too. And I think one of the weird features of our economy right now is that oftentimes it feels like you always have to be on guard, looking around the next corner to make sure that some corporation isn't defrauding you or scamming you or screwing you in some way. And I think that really also creates this sense of indignity and stress and how people experience real freedom in their day-to-day lives. Yes, depends on how government is working, but it also depends on big corporations not being able to get away with bullying you or abusing you.
And many of the people we will be talking to were formerly a part of the Federal Trade Commission, aka the FTC, which is a government body which upholds regulations and helps enforce antitrust.
My name is Alvaro Bedoya, and I most recently was a commissioner at the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC basically fights the fraudsters and monopolists of the world. We sue the Jeff Bezos, the Martin Shkreli's, the Kroger's trying to buy the Albertsons of the world. And what we try to do is, number one, keep them from defrauding and deceiving people. And number two, keep them from tilting the playing field in their favor so that small businesses and workers aren't getting screwed. So that's basically what we do. I say we. I was the president illegally fired me tried to illegally fire me in March 18th. To your question, why would President Trump try to fire an FTC commissioner who he didn't nominate or rather wasn't on his party? It's because all of his golfing buddies and all of his dinner buddies, whether they're in tech or oil and gas or you name it in terms of the billionaire industry, when they buy one of their competitors, when they put out a new product and lie to consumers about how it works and how much money they're going to be charged, or the product tries to trap them in some kind of subscription trap, the FTC would be the ones who shut that down. And so if you can exercise minute control over this watchdog, you can exercise total power over certain sectors of the economy.
So many people use the word regulation as a kind of boogeyman when it really is just laws and rules. So I asked one of the decade's top enforcers about this.
My name is Doha Mekki, and for 10 years, I worked at the antitrust division of the U.S. Department of Justice. I started off as a line prosecutor and left in January 2025 as the highest ranking antitrust official in the Justice Department. You have to unpack what regulation is and what it means, because there's a huge gap between regulation in the ways that it's sort of used politically and like the reality on the ground. And so like many terrible things in our political economy, it kind of began in the 1980s with the Reagan administration, where you're sort of seeing and feeling this political messaging about how regulation is bad for business, it's bad for our progress as people. And it's frankly not true, because the core of regulation is a set of rules about fair dealing and how we are going to engage with each other. And like all law, where we know law is people are the objects of the law's solicitude, and law is just a set of values written down. These are just rules for how we are going to engage with each other, how we transact business, how we hold one another accountable, what we're sort of permitted to do and not do in a orderly society.
There's been very little imagination spent on how we can use regulation to get better outcomes for people and grow our economy. This is Elizabeth Wilkins, who serves as the president of the Roosevelt Institute and previously served as director of the Office of Policy Planning at the Federal Trade Commission.
There's no such thing as a world that doesn't have regulation. It's just, what kind of regulation do we want, right? This is like the idea of a free market is kind of a myth, right? Like markets are always regulated by whatever rules you choose to put in place or not put in place. They're governed by background rules like laws and statutes and enforcement schemes and all kinds of things, right? So it's not like there's a state of nature and we are deciding whether or not to intervene. It is what public policy and what state power should always be about, which is how do we shape markets towards public ends, right? So for like a lot of decades, we have had markets that have been actively shaped towards creating shareholder value, financializing the economy, and producing incredibly wide inequality in favor of a few. And like, that's a choice.
Federalizing the losses, privatizing the gains.
Correct. We have been a little bit duped by the idea that there's some kind of like economic rules of nature that dictate that we should do it that way, or that this is the natural states of markets, but it's not. It's a policy choice, and we can make different ones, right? And so if you stop and you think, okay, well, if we can make different ones, what would they be?
And what people don't get is that regulation can help get rid of abuses in both the public and private sector.
At its core, regulation is just a set of rules, and regulation is supposed to target fairness, right? They're just rules of the road. And again, in the public imagination, there's this idea that only the government regulates. But I know from my time at the Justice Department investigating huge multinational corporations that there are private regulations as well. And when the government does not enact law that is democratically accountable and equally applied and neutrally enforced, sometimes dominant corporations and cartels of corporations actually fill the vacuum, right? So I'll give you some examples. In the context of Apple's monopoly, where we did file a monopolization case during the Biden administration, the private rule that 30% of all revenues that are transacted on apps, for example, are siphoned away by Apple. Rules that say you can only switch your health insurance once a year for most people, that's regulation too, right? Rules that allow huge financial services companies to impose a 1% tax on all transaction. I mean, that is a massive tax on the GDP. And so I actually had a chance to testify in the Senate in June about deregulation. And it was really important to me to make the point in the Senate Judiciary Committee that regulation is not just public, right? There's private regulation too. And as folks who care about economic opportunity and fairness and protecting the liberties of all people, we have to understand that if we don't get busy reimagining a regulation that is by the people and for the people, there will be very perverse interests that fill the void.
And while in many ways regulation and antitrust are handled by the same part of the government, they are very different.
Antitrust law can sound arcane, but practically it can determine things like how much you're paying for groceries. It could determine whether you're driving 5 miles to the hospital or having to drive 80 miles to the hospital. It can determine whether you can actually afford your life-saving medicine or whether you're actually having to ration it or skip things like insulin because the big pharma companies have kept it too expensive. If you're a worker, it can determine, can you easily switch jobs? Or has an employer sneakily stuck a non-compete clause in your contract that says even when you leave this job, you can't go to certain other businesses?
Though many people think of regulation as being some modern thing, it has roots with the founding fathers.
We've had these laws on the books for a long time. And, Congress passed these laws because in their words, they said, we just went through the American Revolution. We overthrew a king. And we didn't just overthrow a king to then let ourselves be ruled by economic tyrants or autocrats of trade. And there was a real understanding that if what you really want for people is freedom, you need to protect them from the kings and the monarchs, but also from the monopolies. And so that's what these laws are about.
The way these companies that need to be regulated prey upon individuals is not something that crosses partisan or socioeconomic lines. These are things that no American wants and everyone is affected by.
I think sometimes it can feel like technology is just this thing that is happening to us, and we're just like people that are stuck riding this roller coaster and who knows where we'll end up. But no, actually, government and the public has a really important role to play in deciding the trajectory of these technologies in the first place, right? What data can they collect? Can't they collect? What can these chatbots do or not do? And I think the fact that the government has taken such a backseat to trying to determine that future is a big problem, because then functionally it's not like there are no decision makers. No, those decision makers are basically a small number of executives who have a very particular set of interests that are getting to call all the shots, and the public is just being subjected to that. So I think we do need kind of more public accountability, more kind of public involvement in decisions that are going to affect us so fundamentally for so many decades to come. One of the big turning points was that these companies decided to use business models that are based on monetizing your data. And so they said, we're going to charge you $0 to use the service. That's because we're going to mine all of this information about you and then basically sell it online. I think that has led to a lot of really bad outcomes for people, including just people being surveilled, including just this endless hunger that these companies have for more and more data. That means that if there is a single data breach, your data is everywhere. Suddenly you're having to figure out, is my credit card compromised? Is my identity being stolen? There's just a lot of risk that comes with that. For kids, these technologies, I think, need to have real safeguards and real guardrails. We have former tech executives who will admit that when they are designing some of these technologies, they're actually studying the way that slot machines are designed. They're explicitly designed to keep you addicted, to keep you on the platform as long as possible. Again, that's because they make money from how much data they can collect from you, as well as, with these chat bots that we're seeing, that's a whole new frontier. I mean, there have been some devastating stories, front page stories about how teenagers confiding in these chatbots implicitly encouraging or at least not sounding the alarm on and teenagers expressing certain things has resulted in kids committing suicide. There's this whole area that's totally unregulated. At the FTC, I met parents who had lost kids because they had been facing so much abuse and bullying on social media, which is totally unregulated.
A lack of regulation created the media environment we are in today, where it feels as if we have the tiniest mainstream media doing real journalism.
One of the key mechanisms through which big tech really impoverished local news was through their monopoly over advertising. Traditionally, we had ad markets where even local newspapers and local media would be able to basically make revenue. And once Google came along, it basically started to monopolize all of that in ways that just totally deprived these publishers. And now we have lawsuits and judges agreeing that the way Google did that was actually illegal. It violated the law. And unfortunately, we didn't have at the time enforcers who were taking quick action, which is why these problems have festered. And now we have thousands and thousands of newspapers and local news organizations that have gone under, and we can't just reverse the clock on that.
It sounds easy to get the American people to support this because no one wants so much of it. But when the rubber hits the road, there are many things that make regulation and delivering for people difficult in this country.
When I think about regulation, I really think about different ways the government is either limiting what businesses can do or requiring them to do certain things or setting guardrails in place, as you said. And right now we have a system where a lot of dominant firms have a lot of not just economic power, but political power. And they can lobby, they can put pressure on the regulators, on the enforcers to try to dissuade them from really standing up for people. And unfortunately, for many decades, I think that's what has been happening. And when I was at the FTC and I would travel around the country talking to people, they would just express a real sense of disillusionment. People think the government is captured. People think the government is structured to favor the rich and powerful corporations. And I think some of that stems from the fact that it has been really hard for the government to fight for working people. We tried to do that at the FTC, and I think it is possible, but it's really going to take a focus on how do we govern effectively. I think the other thing is you need to think about how do you govern in a way that's actually making a difference in people's lives. The other trend we've seen is that sometimes regulators or lawmakers have a preference for these half measures that are not actually fixing the problem and actually can feel like they're just creating more burden. There's this issue of data privacy, right? What kind of data about you can companies collect? And right now, we basically have a free-for-all where corporations can collect all sorts of sensitive information about you, your exact location, your health data, your whole browsing history. They can sell that to the highest bidder. We've even seen really dangerous reports of stalkers just being able to buy data online about their victims. And one of the ways that enforcers and regulators had thought about dealing with this problem for a long time was to say, well, as long as companies are disclosing to you what they're doing with your data, as long as they can just have these long terms of service that are saying we can do whatever we want, that'll be enough to protect people. And we all know that that's fake, right? We all see these terms of service. We all have to use these services. And so we just click away. But that doesn't mean we're consenting to these companies surveilling us. So what we did at the FTC was actually we just created rules that said that firms with certain types of sensitive data can't collect it in the first place. They can't assume that they're collecting it unless you affirmatively allow them to. And so that's just one example where we're doing away with all of these disclosures and just trying to push for something that'll actually give people a real change in their daily lives and what rights they have.
A lot of times voters vote on cost of living. Regulation can help lower the cost of living. It can do things like keep rent prices affordable.
I think housing and healthcare are just they're sort of twin examples of places where you find really alarming practices. When I was at DOJ, we sued a company called RealPage for algorithmic collusion that really seemed to align rental prices, kept landlords feeling very comfortable foregoing tenants because they knew that they could sort of artificially inflate their prices, as alleged in the complaint that DOJ filed. And it was so extraordinary that when we went to amend that complaint in January, we actually made a choice to sue the largest landlords in the country because the practices had spanned 43 different states and well north of 1 million units that we could identify, and probably more, frankly. And so the ability of companies to collude in frictionless ways, in ways that are frankly difficult to imagine, even in the 1990s, was truly shocking to me. And healthcare, we've seen recent reporting just in the last few days that Americans are likely to see some of the steepest climbs in healthcare premiums that we've seen in recent decades. And it's just because they can. The cost of care delivery is frankly difficult to parse because there are so many, frankly, intermediaries and monopolies extracting value from the healthcare system, and who's getting hosed, right? Who's getting stuck with higher prices, higher premiums, higher deductibles, and frankly, less care? The American people. I should say, this is not a place where the government has done absolutely nothing. I think Obamacare was signature landmark legislation that sought to address this problem, but even that has not saved the American people from really the tyranny of private insurance markets. And so we need to rethink the whole system. I suspect that if you were thinking about the regulatory scheme for health insurance today, you might rethink, for example, the fact that people have to get health care primarily through their employer, right? Like that, just as a starting point, that's one to rethink.
And it is a very intentional conservative policy to keep it this way.
You can find like old Heritage Foundation reports where there are proposals to provide broad public access to healthcare, right? And there are concerns about, frankly, empowering people a bit too well and making them less economically independent.
And it's not just healthcare. A lack of regulation on how people are employed is a large reason everyday people are so unhappy in this country as the wealth gets siphoned to the top 1%.
The first has to do with this fiction that businesses increasingly engage in of calling everyone who works for them an independent contractor. Let's make this super concrete and no pun intended. Let's talk about the construction industry. If you look back to the 1970s, construction jobs, they've always been hard jobs. A couple generations ago, construction jobs were not just hard jobs, they were also good jobs. You could provide for a family of 4 on a construction job if you've achieved some seniority. You could, with a little luck, maybe buy a boat for the weekend. Maybe you could a lot of folks could send their kid to school, to college. And now construction work is subsistence work. You are constantly barely making it or you're not making it. And what we all see is the construction industry is increasingly dominated by Mexican, Central, and South American workers. And so some people look at that and say, what the hell? Why are these folks coming in and taking our jobs? The hard answer is those were not the same jobs. What no one paid attention to, what is far less shiny and far less easy to notice, is that starting in the 80s and then exploding in the 90s, 2000s, developers stopped hiring people as W-2s, as their full employees. They started pretending that all the people who worked for them were independent contractors that ran their own independent businesses, such that you don't have to pay them overtime, you don't have to pay them unemployment insurance, you don't have to pay into workers' compensation. And so these jobs that used to be decent jobs, hard but decent jobs, are now subsistence jobs. And guess what? When you hire someone as a 1099, you're much less likely to ask them for documentation that they're legally authorized to work in this country. And it's not those Central American workers showed up and said, no, boss, I'm going to outwork this person. And the person said, yes, I hire you. What happened is that the developers at the top said, we're going to make these 1099 independent contractors. And the folks who previously relied on that kind of income for that work had to look elsewhere to provide for their families. And you have folks coming in and taking them as subsistence labor because they have no other choice. And so checking what's called fissuring, the fissured workplace, the term David Weil came up with it. By the way, Uber and Lyft also, DoorDash also call their workers, quote unquote, independent contractors.
One of the biggest misconceptions is that regulations to protect consumers need to go through a ton of red tape or need to get Congress to legislate them, and that can take forever. But many of the consumer protections we know and love are actually just laws that aren't being enforced.
There's also an opportunity to still be using the laws on the books. And I think one thing that was really shocking to me, honestly, when I was at the FTC was just how much authority is actually still on the books that just gets ignored or overlooked. And this was also part of the Reagan legacy. They really sought to shrink agencies' own understanding of their own powers. And so I think there's, yes, opportunity for Congress to legislate, to make new rules, but also an opportunity to use much more effectively the laws we already have on the books. One of the things that Congress did in the early 90s was basically tell the FTC that they needed to scrutinize basically this issue of made in USA labels. So companies sometimes will import goods from other countries, but then slap a made in USA label on them. Which deceives consumers if you care about, getting your products in America. But it's also unfair for the businesses that are making their products here. And for several decades, the FTC had basically ignored that, request from Congress and didn't do anything about it to really put, teeth and muscle behind a rule that would penalize companies if you lie about where your products are made. So when I came to the FTC, we were able to finalize a rule that says you can't lie about where your products are made. The agency had also for decades not done anything about just consumer protection rules, which, we were told couldn't be done because it would take 5 years or 10 years. And when we took a closer look, it was that the agency itself had added all sorts of procedures and red tape to make the process longer, even though there was no good reason for it. It wasn't legally required. So we changed that, and it meant that we could get through rules more quickly in 2 or 3 years. And so we passed a rule that basically says you can't have fake reviews online. Right. I mean, everybody's so dependent on these online reviews. We passed a rule that said companies have to make it as easy to cancel a subscription as it is to sign up for one. Unfortunately, a court recently struck that down, which I think was a big shame and something the agency should still be doing. And so we just put in place these bread and butter rules that, again, are about having an economy where companies can't trick and lie to you.
And no conversation about regulation would be complete without discussing how much obstruction comes from, you guessed it, lobbyists.
Lobbying is absolutely something that gets in the way. And I think the thing to point out is that lobbyists are really smart people hired to do really bad things. And so it's not all they do is just like whisper in the ear of a senator or a congressman. No, they're placing op-eds. They're paying for social media influencer campaigns. They're paying for ads on the metro as you pull into Union Station, right? So what lobbyists do isn't just try to get your stuff overruled in Congress, right? What lobbyists do is create a whole ecosystem of resistance to the rules that are out there protecting workers, small businesses, and independent farmers, so to speak.
Many times when regulation is discussed, it's framed as being something that's only supported by the Democratic base. But if explained in the right way, Republicans can actually really support it too, because they need help from these predatory companies just as much as Democrats do.
In agriculture, farmers, they face truly just staggering odds just to make a living and keep multi-generational farms going. And one of the things that we heard when we went out to farms and when we had farmers actually in to meet with us in the Justice Department was right to repair issues. So farming equipment is incredibly expensive, and farmers are often at the mercy of huge multinational companies that impose these rules that, they can only be repaired by certain accredited aftermarket providers. And so they're left waiting for these repairs to happen. They're very, very expensive. And meanwhile, they cannot sort of reap rewards for farming. And that's extraordinary. Again, that's an arbitrary set of rules, right? Basic enforcement of our antitrust laws, including the FTC Act, would address things like that. We heard it from chicken farmers, right? So the largest chicken processors in the country own an outsized percentage of that industry, and they are able to essentially outsource risk to chicken farmers, including through really onerous loan terms, and really privatize a lot of the gains. There's a system called the tournament system that we addressed when we were in government that just sought to bring basic fairness and fair dealing to that market, and a really vulnerable sort of cross set of people, often distributed in the South. And it was extraordinary. The government had not done anything about a system that some people said had roots in sharecropping.
It's important to realize that sometimes these regulations take multiple years to be enacted. And that really creates a problem because people don't see how these regulations affect their everyday lives.
One of the things that the agriculture department did was they eliminated junk fees on school lunches for low-income kids, which was really overdue. Why are they paying these extra fees? That doesn't come into effect until 2027. It was done during the Biden administration. Why are we pushing out so much? And oftentimes that pressure is coming from companies to say, oh, we need a lot of time to come into compliance. I think that can be a problem. The administration was able to negotiate with certain drug companies, but even when that comes into effect is going to be in a few years. So I think we need to be thinking in a very focused way. How do we govern effectively, efficiently, but also in a way that's going to make a difference in people's lives right away?
One of the big problems with why regulation doesn't work is that the penalties and the fines that these companies face are very small and very toothless. So they ignore them again and again.
I think we also need to think about what penalties are actually going to make CEOs and businesses take the rules and the laws more seriously. How do we make sure we're not just doing kind of slap on the wrists that can look like more fines sometimes, but it can also look like holding individual executives accountable? Or the government gives so many benefits, so many subsidies to certain types of businesses. If you're found liable of having broken the law, should some of those be taken away, those government benefits or advantages, right? So I think we just need to think more creatively, more expansively about what kind of remedies do we have in place? What penalty do you have to pay if you break the law and if you're a big corporation?
One of the things we have to incentivize is how we keep government workers honest. We have to figure out who the people are who play the key roles of regulating big money so they can be incentivized to not go easy when these abuses occur.
We've had some fine public servants serving at the FTC, but I would say that a plurality, if not a majority of them, had just gone right back to working for massive corporate law firms that defend corporate America against fraud suits, monopolization suits. And so you can only shake the boat so hard if you want to get a job working for corporate America right after your tenure as FTC chair or CFPB head. And so you need to incentivize putting those folks in office. You could have longer cooling off periods so that you can't just go to work for a corporate law firm right afterwards. You can pay these folks more because what happens is salaries have been frozen at levels that haven't been adjusted for inflation. And so I'll just share one thing I did. I drew down savings every month I was an FTC commissioner. And so as a result, a lot of folks feel pressed to go work for the private sector right afterwards. And by the way, I know I'm not alone. And so it's actually quite common for commissioners to not fix things around the house, not fix their car, just because you just don't have the cash flow month to month.
After what will be a long 4 years of Trump delivering for his wealthy friends, very likely we will see a thirst for an aggressive defense of the American people's interests. And that will happen with regulation.
We actually need to reimagine our political economy. And for better or for worse, the American people made a choice in 2024. And I will tell you they were not offended by the idea of a government that actually takes power and utilizes it. What the American people are hungry for is a government that takes power from the people, right? Like legitimately granted power from the people, and actually imposes a set of rules that are fair instead of what we currently have, which is a set of rules where there is incredible favor and bordering on white glove concierge service for the richest, most powerful billionaires and oligarchs on planet Earth. And again, we just saw it, right? They were fine dining with the president and the White House just this week, even as the president's policy and the policies of his administration really hose working people, right? And make our economic opportunities more dire and really take from working people and working families and kind of redistribute it up to people who already have so much power in terms of political power and so much material wealth.
There is a roadmap for getting out of this, and it's not even a century old. It's from recent American history.
If you go back to the 1930s, people were literally, Americans were going to Italy and looking at how the economy worked and how the government worked because they thought maybe fascism was a better idea for democracy than democracy, for like delivering on basic economic prosperity, right? That was like an active debate in intellectual circles, in governing circles, et cetera. And so part of what FDR knew he had to do was like...
not that different from now, really,
Correct.
because Republicans love autocrats.
As we are seeing. And people were willing to vote for something because they were like, I don't know, these like abstract appeals to democracy are not as animating as the fact that like I can't buy my groceries, right? So like I don't really care what's going on over there as long as you can make sure that I can buy my groceries. And like rather than saying how awful, shouldn't we all have some emotional commitment to democracy? What we need to do is say people mostly really care about whether they can afford their groceries, send their kids to school, maybe if they can go out to dinner once a week or go camping or whatever it is. And it's our job to prove that democracy is better than any other system at delivering that. That's what we did in the Great Depression. And that is what we can do again. I think there's like a total formula for that, right? What did FDR do? He curbed corporate power. He supported labor power. He created economic security. And he narrated what he was doing every day in a way that was legible to people at the time, his fireside chats. That is like the least radical thing you could imagine. That is, in fact, as American as apple pie, the New Deal. We have a new set of market challenges. We have a new set of political economy challenges. We have climate change. We have AI. You know, the context is different. The challenges and the bases for people's anxiety is different. But the formula is not that different, right?
If we are entrusted to govern again, we have to show the American people that we are on their side, right? Like that is the soul of FDR and the New Dealers, right? Showing people that we believe in an economy that is built for them and not just for the ultra wealthy and the elite is the most important thing we can do. And I mean, you see this in candidates now who are having, at least if you trust some of the polling, really sort of astronomical impact. It's not a mystery that you see millennials who probably came of age during the financial crisis and then also saw some of the failures of our market economy around COVID, who are essentially saying we're demanding a better politics and we are naming our enemies, right? We are naming the cause of the problem. And we are saying that we are going to be relentlessly focused on the economic issues that hurt the American people most. And I think that is a really exciting and wonderful thing in our politics.
It's not just government bureaucrats who need to do this. We need our government officials and the media to help narrate this for the American people.
There is a key portion of this, which is that you do have to have a narrative and a narrator who can tell the story of who is the bad guy in this story, who is the hero in this story, what is the action and what is the outcome, right? And there's a story waiting to be told here, right? There's a villain, which is the airline that is just trying to extract every last nickel and dime from you. There is a hero, which is government who's on your side, who is willing to stand up to the bully and do something about it. There is an outcome, which is that like you get to go on vacation with your family without feeling frustrated and gross about the market interactions that you're a part of. But you need somebody with a big enough megaphone and with the talent in this moment, in this media environment, to be able to tell that narrative, to pick that up and tell that narrative. And we need politicians who are unafraid of telling that story, who are talented at telling that story, and who are unafraid to hire the Lina Kahns of the world to do the work so that they have a story to tell.
The American people, at least as we've seen it in races where candidates are sort of pursuing this people first progressive economic framework, I think people are getting it. And I'd also say that you can't divorce politics from history and other events happening on the ground. Milton Friedman and a lot of the sort of thinkers that became part of the like conservative economic movement that really took power in the 80s, those guys started writing in like the 50s and 60s, right? Like Milton Friedman published Capitalism and Freedom in 1962, and nobody cared because he wasn't Milton Friedman yet, right? What did, I suspect, get some of these ideas more traction was that you had business interests behind them, but you also had the broad geopolitical anxiety of the moment, which was about our competitiveness relative to the former Soviet Union, right? And so politicians also sort of framed those economic policies as a means of getting out of a terrible economic downturn, including some of the inflation that we saw around the Carter administration, but also competitiveness to a geopolitical rival, right? And so I think that you see opportunity even in moments of crisis. And there's no doubt the Trump administration has ushered in crises at home and crises abroad. And I think that you see a progressive economic agenda that is people-centered and people first sort of taking roots amid that chaos. And I think that the American people are listening.
We see over and over again, people want a government that fights for them. Trump came into power because people believed that Trump was going to fight for them. He wasn't, but Democrats can, and they will do it with regulation.
It is amazing to see how many different market interactions feel disempowering, humiliating, frustrating, dehumanizing to people. And that frustration and anger is like, it is a well of untapped resource for really making some change if we could figure out how to demonstrate that government can actually do something about that. Like that is, if we are able to both listen to and tap into that frustration, use our authorities to do something about it, be unafraid to take the risks associated with delivering, and recognize that actually picking a fight is beneficial. It shows people who you are and what you stand for in a way that you can't do with just words. Like that's how we get people excited about us again, I think, is to be unafraid to get into those fights and show people who we are.
We are going to have to find a way that government does this in a meaningful way as soon as possible.
We need to rebuild in a way that brings those people back, right? That creates a government that can actually deliver for those people, that makes authoritarianism unattractive and makes democracy attractive again. That is, again, what FDR did in his time. We need to look at rebuilding a government that is nimble enough to be able to deliver fast, that understands all of the tools to regulate markets and understands that you need to regulate markets towards public ends, making people's lives good lives to lead, and also that has meaningful participation from people. I think what it comes down to is truly flipping our risk profile when it comes to governing, that we have allowed a world in which we get into government and then mostly we are afraid to make mistakes because those are politically costly, rather than truly pricing in the cost of under-delivering for people, which is slower and more insidious and longer term, but like, look where it got us, right? And now we have this guy who doesn't care about any norms, is breaking everything, seems to be doing it just fine. So if we could take a little bit of that energy and say, if he can break norms for destruction, how about we break norms in the service of building something that will be good for people and not take no for an answer when it comes to the big swings that we should be taking. And I just like for a modern example, I had the privilege and pleasure of working with Lina Kahn at the Federal Trade Commission in the Biden administration. And to my mind, she is an extraordinary example of this kind of leadership. Like, what are we? We are public servants. What are we here for? We are here for the mission of this agency, which is to promote competition to protect the public from monopolistic behavior. That doesn't mean doing things that are safe or easy or clear. It means starting from what people are telling us are the problems they are having in their market interactions, and then finding the tools that we have to be able to attack those problems in a holistic way. If we could do that across the board, and if our solutions could be legible to people, right? Not like this is a super complicated negotiation over drug prices that you might see in 5 years and you didn't do who did it for you, but rather there is a cap on insulin at $35 and you can see and feel there is a ban on junk feeds, and that is just not something that a company is allowed to do for you anymore. That is, I think, a modern day example of the attitude towards governance and the urgency with which we should be using our tools on behalf of working people. That is not the way Democrats usually do it, but that we have opportunity to do next time.
Both Democrats and Republicans want to be defended against people who prey upon them.
I feel like we are stuck in this left versus right doom loop where, we get in and they think we're getting our punches in. And so when they get in, they're going to punch us back. And I feel like we are missing struggle that people wake up in the morning and think about, which is not Democrat versus Republican, but how on God's earth am I going to pay these bills from this monopolist company or this monopolist utility because my employer who pays me, jack isn't paying me what I'm worth, right? I don't think people wake up in the morning and think like, I'm a Democrat and I'm going to stick it to the R's. And I frankly don't think, despite some of the fervor of the president's supporters, I don't think the vast majority of the people who voted for this president wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to stick it to the libs. No, they say, how the hell am I going to pay the bills? I think that on the left and the right, we need to start seeing the fight of our lives, not liberals versus conservatives, but populists versus oligarchs. And I think we need to reframe government in this way. The level of despair in this country is completely underappreciated. Farmers kill themselves at a rate higher than almost any other profession, right? We value people who work with their hands for a living, right? Construction worker may not be an elite job, but it's a job that like people respect because you're actually building things. It's a hard job. It's a job we respect. Right now, as we speak, every 10 days, a construction worker literally dies of thirst and heat in Miami-Dade County and broader Florida. We live in a time when billionaires like literally compete to launch rockets into space. And the most common thing to do when you get a cancer diagnosis is to set up a GoFundMe page to beg your friends and family for money. This is the world we live in. And the sad fact is, look, you see the background, like I'm okay. I live a professional upper middle class life. I don't struggle to pay the bills, but I am a weirdo, right? A growing share of people in this country wake up anxious, wake up not knowing how they're going to pay the bills, regularly working 2 or 3 jobs a week. And what that does is it produces anger. And so I think a lot of folks in the Democratic Party, and look, I'm a Democrat, are really focused on, okay, we gotta fund up the groups that fight for democracy. We gotta fund up the groups that protect people against illegal deportations. Amen. Absolutely. But if you don't get at the cause of the anger, which is this feeling of complete lack of control over our material lives, the suspicion that like, what the hell is going on up there? What the hell are these elites doing? We're going to just continue in this doom loop of the left blames the right blames the left. And so I think that reframing is important. The other thing I'll share with you is Lina Kahn is really popular among a whole lot of conservatives, right? And they have no idea who I am, but when I tell them I work to ban subscription traps where you sign up online, but you can only cancel over the phone. I work to ban those ridiculous junk fees that increasingly pack your rent bill, or you show up at a hotel, you're like, congratulations, you're at a resort. Here's this mandatory $90 resort fee you've never heard of. I tell them, I blocked the Kroger-Albertsons merger. There is not one MAGA conservative, I'll just say, where I've described the record that we achieved under Chair Calm, who does not walk away with a whole lot less skepticism. And so, number one, we're underestimating the amount of despair in this country. Number two, there are true bridges to be built along the lines of economic populism. And am I going to surrender on the idea that trans kids are kids and trans people are people and they deserve to be treated with respect? No, I will not. Am I going to surrender to the idea that there should be mass police picking up random brown people on the street and sticking them in a swamp gulag? No, I will not. But at least we can find some ground we can agree on, which is there is a vulgar amount of inequality in our society, and that needs to be the problem we fight.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. We made this series to get the conversation going, to get people thinking about what America can be after Trump's disastrous second term. We want people talking about this, so tell us if you agree or you disagree. Please share this with a friend and click like on the video and comment so it can spread to more people on YouTube.